Today, I want to introduce David Allen. He's a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Navy, a graduate of West Point and the.
I beg your pardon.
Did I do that? A graduate of Annapolis. He actually grew up in Annapolis, so he just went to school right next door, right? Sorry, David. Don't kill me, Jet. You do that after. He's a graduate of Annapolis and the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. Did 30 years in the Navy, mostly on ships. From every size ship you can come up to. He was aircraft carriers, destroyers, and hydrofoils, right? And he loved the hydrofoils. They're a lot of fun to run around in, right? Yeah. So anyhow, he retired from the Navy about 30 years ago as a captain. And since then, he's been a consultant to the Department of Defense in cybersecurity. And so I will just turn it over to him, and he can take it off, shake off.
So for Jennifer, how many sound engineers does it take to change a light bulb? Check one, check 1, 2, check 1, check 1, 2. Hi, my name is Dave Allen. My name is Dave Allen, and happy Pi Day. By the way, if you write the numbers 3.14 on a piece of paper and then hold it up to a mirror, it spells P-I-E. Happy Pi Day. That is a very geeky intro, but I am one of the classic modern geeks. I am a cyber warrior. I spent the last 30 years of my life chasing computer networks and the nasty people that tend to do nasty things on computer networks. So who am I? As Art said, I'm a graduate of the Naval Academy, class of '77. I was a literature and languages major at the Naval Academy, but I still graduated with a Bachelor of Sciences in General Engineering. So my major was basically on top of all of those engineering courses, and my wife likes to say that it's perfectly appropriate that I graduated with a BS in English. However, when I graduated from the academy, I was already fluent in French, which I speak with a German accent, in Italian, which I speak with a French accent, and in English, which I speak with a Merlin accent. Yes, you understand, Merlin, we do not have more than 2 syllables. In Merlin, everything is contracted to the 2 easiest syllables, so it's not Annapolis, it's Neplis. It's not the Chesapeake, it's Chesapeake. And it's not Calvert County, it's Culvert. And down in Culvert County, people don't say y'all, they say mung ya, as in among you, mung ya. Mung ya going downtown kind of far? Deed 'em. So I served in the Navy for almost 30 years. As Art pointed out, I was on an aircraft carrier initially. I wound up commanding a couple of ships. My last 2 tours in the Navy, I was the chief of communications for the entire Mediterranean basin and for the 6th Fleet. I also participated in operations in Lebanon, in Panama, in lost track there, Kosovo, out in the Arabian Gulf and Kuwait. And my last job in the Navy was as the Navy CIO, the Chief Information Officer. And that's not public affairs, that's Chief Information Systems Officer. I was essentially the head computer geek for the Navy. I retired out of the Navy in 2002, and I went to work almost immediately for the Secretary of Defense, and I became the director of a cyber warfare testing program where I had multiple teams under me that would travel all over the world, and we would try to break into things. I spent 30 years in the Navy enforcing the rules, and then when I retired, I got paid for finding creative ways to break them. Our job was to break into things both physically and logically. And so we basically illegally got onto bases, into buildings, into headquarters, into command centers, and then into their computer systems. That was our job. Now, the reason we do that is to figure out where the vulnerabilities are so that we can patch the vulnerabilities, but also teach the people that own that property, those networks, those buildings, those bases, how to stop people like us. It was fun. It was actually a lot of fun. I remember walking into the Chief of Staff's office at a command that will go unmentioned to protect the innocent, or the guilty, as the case may be. And I said, "Good morning, Chief of Staff, I'm your 10:30. And he said, "No, you're not. I don't have anything on my calendar at," "Oh, hello. When did that go on my calendar?" I said, "I put it there 5 minutes ago." He said, "How did you do that?" I said, "I did it from your flag lieutenant's desk." He said, "What were you doing on his account?" And I said, "Well, I borrowed his credentials." He said, "How'd you borrow his credentials?" I said, "Don't blame him. He doesn't know it yet." He said, "How did you get in the building?" I said, "That's what I'm here to tell you about." He said, "Well, who said you could come here?" I said, "Actually, you did. About 6 months ago, you signed an authorization for a 90-day exposure to my teams." He said, "Yes." And he said, "So you're just here now?" And I said, "No, we've been here 3 times so far." I said, "The first time we came out, we surveyed the base. We looked at where all the vulnerabilities were. We walked around with our cell phones in our hands, like most Americans, busy talking to somebody. Except all of these cell phones have really good cameras. And while I was on the phone, I was walking past people and looking at the badges hanging on their collars going click, 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 click. And then we went back to our headquarters and we checked and we found, okay, we've got 2 or 3 good pictures of badges that we can use to create counterfeit badges. So we created counterfeit badges for ourselves. And then we went back out with some electronic tools. Have you ever heard of an ARFID theft? Okay, radio frequency identification. It's what's on your credit cards. You know that little chip that you've got in your credit card? That's a radio frequency emitter. And with a cell phone and the right software, I can walk past you. I have to get about 2 feet away and download your credit card. And then your credit card, and your credit card, and your badge, and your badge. And then use those credentials on the cell phone with the fake badge that looks good to get into the building. Once we get into the building, we start planting monitoring devices and things like that. God bless Americans. We love to be helpful. We really love to be helpful. One time I was trying to get into a building. I was in a foreign country. I won't mention which one. And I was dressed as a janitor. I had a bucket and a mop, and the bucket was filled with slimy-looking water. And I was trying to juggle the bucket and the mop and my badge and trying to badge into the building so I could go in and mop the floor. And a young major obligingly opened the door for me and held it. And I went in and I started mopping the floor. And as soon as somebody walked out of one of the offices, I dropped my mop handle in the door as he walked away, and then went in, planted the monitoring devices, which were all in Ziploc baggies underneath all of that slimy-looking water. Now, I almost got caught. There's a couple of Naval Academy graduates in here, and they'll back me up. You see, civilians mop floors like this. They just shove the dirt back and forth. But sailors swab decks. Pull the bucket out of the mop and you spin it. Or you pull the mop out of the bucket and you spin it. Plant it, and then you do this S-curve, dragging it back towards yourself so that you pull all of the dirt towards the bucket. Well, I wasn't mopping the floor. I was a foreign national janitor, supposedly, and I was using a sailor's technique to swab the deck. And a Navy lieutenant commander walked past and kind of went, "Yeah, no." What does this all tell us? This is the point of why I'm here today. We are wide open. We are wide open for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is, God bless Americans, we like to be helpful. We help our enemies because we don't know that they're our enemies. We just think they need help. We also help our enemies by being careless. We do things because, yeah, that's low risk. Nobody's coming after me. The Chinese are going after generals and admirals, right? The Russians are going after big businesses and pharma. But no, they are coming after you. This is a target-rich environment, and the United States and American citizens are the richest targets in that target set. So last year, a midshipman who was expelled from the Naval Academy, see, I keep going back to the academy. A midshipman that was expelled from the Naval Academy posted on social media a false report that there was an active shooter at the Naval Academy, March of last year, rampaging through Bancroft Hall, which is the dormitory at the Naval Academy. In this false social media post, he said that the active shooter is disguised as a campus cop. Now, they locked down the Naval Academy, and immediately all the campus cops started going through clearing the buildings to make sure there was not an active shooter. Well, what happened was one of those campus cops came around a corner, one of the midshipmen was standing there with his parade rifle and hit the guy in the face with the butt of the rifle. The cop pulled his weapon and shot the midshipman. Small investment. This kid posted a false report on social media. Big outcome. A security guard with a smashed nose and a midshipman with a bullet through his arm. It doesn't take much. The investment for the enemy does not require them to do much. So we rely on information in our lives every day, but we should be questioning the sources of that information. People laugh when I say that I do not do online banking. I don't. And if I want to make large purchases online, I will go to Safeway and buy a gift card and then charge that purchase on the gift card because it's not tied to my bank account. And people laugh and say, you're a little paranoid about that. I said, no, I'm actually a lot paranoid about that because I have hacked into financial systems. I know it can be done. And I'm not a particularly talented hacker. I did have a lot of talented hackers working for me. But I'm not, quite frankly, the first computer program I ever wrote, my storage medium was 8 shoeboxes of punch cards. I tell that story to my young hackers, and they're like, golly, sir, I read about that in my computer history class. Ooh. By the way, I come by it honestly enough. My aunt, who passed away in 2000, in her 80s, was one of the first computer programmers in the 1950s. And in those days, the way you programmed a computer is you walked inside of it, because it was about the size of a basketball court, and it had 8-foot-tall vacuum tubes with transuranics in it, so it was also radioactive. And you walked in with big copper cables and you plugged, hello. Whoever it was, they're not worth speaking to. Actually, it's probably, so I'm 70, turned 65 5 years ago, and I can't tell you the number of calls I get every day. Hello. My name is Allison. In Virginia, Medicare requires you to... I got a phone call not too long ago from somebody, and they said, is your wife there? Or they said, is Susan there? I said, this isn't Susan's phone. And they launched into their spiel. And I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you asked me a question, but you didn't afford me a chance to answer. And I said, Susan's not here. And they started to launch into their spiel again. I said, not that it would do you any good. She's deaf as a post, you know. And they kind of paused, and I knew I had them at that point. And I said, she's gone now, bless her heart. And they said, she's gone. Your wife is dead. I said, my wife is dead? They said, your wife is dead? I said, my wife is dead? When did that happen? And they said, you said she's gone. I said, to the grocery. That's where they keep the food, you ninny. I don't think they called me back. So what does all of this mean to our enemies? I mean, all of this is kind of funny, and it is, and sometimes it's not. We're in phase 0 of warfare with a number of countries. Phase 0 is that phase where there's no combat. It's called peacetime competition. We're in phase 0 with China. We are looking for alliances, financial opportunities, strategic opportunities, positioning forces, investing in capabilities that are responding to them doing the same thing. We're in phase 0 with Russia. Well, maybe phase almost 1, but I'll talk about that in a second. We were in phase 0 with Iran 3 weeks ago. We're in phase 2 now. Okay, phase 0, peacetime competition. Phase 1, escalating forces. Escalating forces means we move an aircraft carrier off your coast and we tell you, knock that stuff off or we're going to start hitting you. That's phase 1. Phase 2, ordnance is flying back and forth. The whole point is, it takes us all the way to phase 2 before we start shooting. But the real shots are being fired in phase 0. The opening rounds of the next big conflict on this planet will not go boom. They will go clickety-clack, 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 because that will be the sound of somebody's keyboard launching a malware, a ransomware, a virus, or something else. So we go from phase 0 to phase 2 pretty quickly. And the only thing that stops our adversaries from doing the most damaging things they can do with their computer networks is the same thing that keeps us from doing that to them. It's the new mutually assured destruction. Does everybody remember the Cold War policy of MAD, mutually assured destruction? If I don't do it to you, you won't do it to me. And that's exactly where we stand right now in cyber warfare. This is a Marquis of Queensberry rules that the whole planet is living by. But what were the first shots that were fired in Iran? They were not things that go boom. They were things that went clickety-clack. The very first thing that happened is we took down their communications system, their information networks, their phone switches. You know, we had an opportunity to do that in Kosovo when I was the cyber warfare director. During the conflict in Kosovo, we had a virus that we could launch against Italtel phone switches. The problem was it was out of the box. It had not been modified to just attack Serbian phone switches. And the other problem is almost the entirety of the continent of Europe uses Italtel phone switches. So if we had turned that thing loose, we would have brought down the phone systems across the whole continent. Well, of course we didn't do that. That would be wrong. And yes, there are moral considerations here. But then take a look at what the Russians did in Ukraine. One of the first shots that the Russians fired in Ukraine, actually they had been firing them for like 5 years. One of the first shots they fired was to unbox a brand new vulnerability and launch it against satellite phone systems. The satellite phone systems that the Ukrainians were using for their command and control. The only problem is it was an out of the box. It hadn't been modified. It hadn't been targeted. And so what happened? It took down every satellite terminal on the European continent. Well, there aren't a lot of people walking around with satellite phones in their hands. But you know what there are? There are a whole lot of windmills that use satellite connections to connect back to their control mechanisms. All of those SCADA systems are tied in by those satellite phones. And so all of those windmills, Germany, Denmark, France, Italy, all of those windmills. Now, you wonder why the Europeans are angry at the Russians? It totally blew up their energy grid. All of this is unclassified, by the way. All of this is in open sources. I'm not going to jail. Well, not yet, anyway. This is the thing. The Russians forgot about the Marquis of Queensberry rules. They launched a vulnerability that was out of the box that had collateral damage effects all over the European continent. It doesn't take much for somebody to forget the mutually assured destruction thing. So why does this matter? I'm going to read you some examples. I hate to read off my notes. By the way, I hate to stand behind a podium. For one, I'm almost shorter than most podiums. For two, if I move around, that throws off your aim. So, data storage company, one that has a lot of dealing with the military, lost 38 gigabytes of sensitive data due to a misconfigured cloud storage program. One line of code. One line of code. Millions of dollars. An illicit database of 184 million login credentials for Google, Apple, and Facebook was found. We didn't even know that those accounts had been exposed until we found this file that had all of your passwords. We'll talk about passwords in a second. Ticketmaster, anybody who buys concert tickets or anything else through Ticketmaster, 500 million users' passwords. Now, why is that important? Because, you know, I have one password for Google, and I have a different one for Apple, and I have another one for Ticketmaster, and I have a different one for my bank, and I have a different... How many people have nine different passwords? Yeah. Most people have one or two go-to passwords that they use for everything because I'm not a high-value target. What's the number one most popular password in Washington, D.C.? Password. Yeah. What's the number two most popular password in Washington, D.C.? Redskins. What's the number three password? Dan Snyder sucks. Okay, the Russians and the Chinese, and to a lesser extent, the Iranians and several other countries, have what's called advanced persistent threats. These are highly skilled, highly paid operators who very low, slow, and quietly weevil their way into our networks and establish pathways, backdoors, ransomware, and other things, an advanced persistent threat. They all get cute names. One of the advanced persistent threats for the Russians is called Fancy Bear, and another one is called Polar Bear. And I haven't seen a teddy bear yet, but and the Chinese are typhoons. There's Salt Typhoon, there's Volt Typhoon, and all of these advanced persistent teams, we've identified them by their behaviors, by their signatures, by the way they write code, because quite frankly, if you can tell the difference between Faulkner and Conway writing a novel, you can certainly tell the difference between Li Wei and Ivan Dvorsky and the way they write software. People have very signature ways of writing software, and when you understand software well, you can see those signatures, you can see those patterns. We know these folks are out there operating. We know they're wedging things into our networks. We know they're trying to get a position that they can use at some point in the future. Now, let's talk about the kinds of things that we find that allow advanced persistent threats to get away with what they're doing. We'll start with badges first. Everybody uses badges for buildings, for security, but almost every building, including this one, uses what's called a HID switch, HID. Now, you'd think, oh, that's probably an acronym for something really fancy. And it is. It's an acronym for the company that built them. Human Interface Device Company, HID. The only problem is HID's the only company that's making HID switches, which is why HID switch is a generic term like Kleenex. You know, you don't pick up a Scott's tissue, you pick up a Kleenex, right? And you don't have a General Dynamics badge reader, you have a HID switch. And it's mostly because they're all designed the same way. And those designs have been out there for 30 years. For 30 years, we've been using the same technology to badge ourselves in and out of highly secure spaces. It's well understood, and I can tell you that it takes less than 30 seconds to pop the lid off a HID switch, to short the battery, insert a new card inside the HID switch, and put the cover back on. Now, there's a whole lot of ways to prevent that. You can get set screws that make it harder to pop the cover off. You can get voltage regulators that if you pop the cover off, it senses the change in voltage and shuts down the switch. You can actually get a light sensor and put it inside the HID switch. So when you pop the cover off, the light sensor turns off the switch. And you can even do a third wire on all the switches across your base, and when you get a voltage fluctuation, then it'll shut down the switch. All of that costs money. And most people just buy the basic switch. So you've got a little ignorant switch sitting out there all by itself, and its only job is to recognize your badge, which is how I can take a fake badge and a cell phone with a fake radio frequency identity and get past a HID switch. And everybody knows how to do this. All of the hackers know how to do this. We do war drives around bases looking for Wi-Fi leaks. A war drive sounds really boss, doesn't it? But no, you get in your Toyota Corolla with a laptop, and you drive around, and the laptop has a little antenna on it. And as you drive around, you look for Wi-Fi signals to figure out who's leaking Wi-Fi. We were testing out a new system. It was called Flying Squirrel, of all names. The follow-on was called Woodchuck. I'm not entirely sure what the military designers were into, but there was a rodent thing going on that year. But we were testing out Flying Squirrel, because that's what I did. I was a cyber tester. And we drove over to, White something Mall up in Maryland? White Flint Mall. And we did a war drive around the parking lot to see which stores were leaking Wi-Fi. Well, guess what? A lot of stores have gone to wireless cash registers. We didn't know that. A lot of stores have gone to wireless cash registers. So when you're checking out at the front of the store, your credit card and all of that information, including your address and what you bought and everything else, flies back through the radio frequency to a server in the back room where that transaction is recorded. And we were driving around the parking lot, and we saw these particular signals, because the signals have a format, and like a signature. And we're looking at this signature coming out of Walmart, and we realized that we also saw that signature coming out of somewhere in the parking lot. So we started making our circles smaller and smaller and triangulating around until we found the panel van that was sitting in the parking lot. So then we called the Maryland police and we reported it to them. And then we sat back and watched. And the Maryland police showed up and pulled open the back door, and sure enough, there were about 5 guys in the back of that panel van with radio frequency antennas and laptops, and they were downloading all of those credit card transactions from the Walmart up at White Flint. They were downloading all of those transactions. They were stealing the signals. Oh, by the way, we do that on military bases, and we drive around headquarters buildings where there's supposed to be no Wi-Fi whatsoever. And it's dismaying how frequently we find it anyway. Phishing. So phishing is P-H-I-S-H because, you know, we're geeks and we have to come up with cute names for things. So a phishing expedition is an email that you get from the Nigerian finance minister saying, I have $10 million, just give me your bank account number and I'll wire it to you. Click on this link. And there's all kinds of different fishes that you get, and some of them look really good. I've seen stuff with the Social Security Administration logo on it. I've seen stuff with PayPal. I don't even have a PayPal account, but I get notices from PayPal, hey, there's a problem with your bill, click here. You know, click here is, first off, if you're not expecting an email or it's a business that you're not associated with, that's one red flag. When it says click here, that's another 5 red flags. The first time we did a phishing test at a military base, we sent an email to 100% of the network users on that base. The phishing email read simply, fish wrapper was the subject line, P-H-I-S-H wrapper. And inside that email was an attachment titled, do not open me.doc. 85% of the people who received the email opened the document, which caused a little script to run on their workstation. It looked like one of those Microsoft dialog boxes that pops up, you know, the one that says, your printer's getting low on ink or something like that. Well, this one pops up and it says, you're a moron. And you have to click yes 5 times to make it go away. The second day of the test, the chief of staff, who was a 3-star general, came to see us and said, would you please stop this test? And we said, why? And he said, the commanding general does not appreciate being called a moron. But you get these phishing emails, and they say, click here. Whatever you do, please don't click here. Estonia, 2007, what was called the Estonian cyber riot. Russia decided that when the Estonians moved a statue of a heroic Russian soldier out of the town square in Tallinn, yes, in Tallinn, Estonia, that was a deep insult, and so they launched a cyber riot against the country of Estonia. Estonia completely weathered the cyber riot for a couple of reasons. And one was their military, their government, and their industry were very closely tied in their cybersecurity defenses. And when the Russians tried to overload their networks with a denial of service attack, which just basically means I'm going to send you so much traffic you can't possibly use your networks, the military, the government, and the industry just widened the ditch. They just added all of their bandwidth together, collaborated, and shared it. And so you can pour a flood into the ditch, but if the ditch gets bigger, it ain't a flood anymore. And that's exactly how the Estonians defeated the Russians. Now, I say Russians, but I really can't say that. I was part of the team that investigated the Estonian cyber riot, and one of the things that we discovered is almost all of the internet protocol, IP addresses, from which the Russian attack was launched were American. And they were all privately owned laptops and computers. You click on that link in the fish, you might get software that downloads to your computer that you never notice, but it just sits there until somebody needs it. What the Russians did in Estonia 20 years ago was use all of these individually owned computers for what we call a botnet, a robotic network, a botnet. And they used all of our laptops to launch an attack against a country. And that's how they get in the door. So, why should we care? Well, if a hacker gets into a hydroelectric facility, a dam out west somewhere, and they get into the SCADA system, that's the control system, they can open and close the breaker on one of those turbines. They can open and close that breaker actually at a very high frequency. And what that does is it causes a back current on the turbine. And when it causes a back current on the turbine starts to vibrate. And while those turbines are moving very, very, very fast, and when they start to vibrate, they come apart. And they don't just come apart, they explode. It's not a chemical detonation, it's a kinetic detonation. And what happens is all of those turbine blades go flying 360 degrees of shrapnel. Now, most turbine rooms are not manned, so no casualties, except the turbines are fairly close to each other. And so when one turns into a shrapnel, the next one does, and the next one does, and the next one does. And before you know it, the entire hydroelectric capability has failed, and perhaps the dam is damaged as well. This actually happened in Russia. It didn't happen because somebody was fluttering the breaker. It actually happened because a tree slid into the inlet for one of the turbines, blocked the water flow, and the turbine stalled. But electrically, it was still in motion, and that stall, that differential, caused it to fly apart. And so we know exactly what having one turbine explode looks like, because that was pretty nasty. Now ask yourself what would happen if we lost multiple hydroelectric capabilities out in the American West. Because a lot of the power generation out in the American West is coming off of water flowing down out of the mountains. So what happens if we lose that capability? Well, we lose power, we lose light, we lose medical support, we lose groceries, we lose a lot of things. Loss of life could be fairly high because you will have one large section of the United States dark. And oh, by the way, who makes the parts for those turbines? China. And do they have a stock of them? No, they're made to order. So we don't have a stock, and the suppliers don't have a stock. Now, the technical details of most SCADA systems, most control systems, are well known. They're industry standard. They're not treated as proprietary. And, as we noticed in a couple of tests that we did, the employees of those control systems, of those power systems, actually do BYOD, bring your own device. So they're using their personal laptops and their phones to access the control system. Now, what happens if they got one of those nice emails from the Nigerian finance minister and they clicked on the link? Their phone or their laptop may be already infected, may already be owned by somebody who did that deliberately so that they could get into the SCADA system. These advanced persistent threat actors are very, very targeted about what they do. They don't hit things at random. We know that they're going after certain kinds of people with certain kinds of jobs and certain kinds of responsibilities. Let's see. I'm checking my notes to make sure that I didn't. Okay. Excuse me. Seasonal allergies are killing me. Stuxnet. What happened there? Good research is what happened there. Stuxnet and the Hezbollah pagers are kind of two different sides of the same cyber campaign. Israelis, I think, we can't confirm it because we don't know, studied how the centrifuges were made and operated in Iran. They knew what materials they were made out of, and they knew what the failure modes of those materials were. And so they introduced a program on a flash drive that they managed to get smuggled into the facility. Now, we used to do this all the time. We used to, one of the things we do during our tests is we would randomly drop flash drives in a parking lot. I mean, they're cheap. And people would pick them up and carry them into the office and plug them in to see what was on them. They got that little box that said, "You're a moron." Somebody carried a flash drive into the office where the software was being written for the controllers which managed the centrifuges. So think back, reverse engineering. First, I have to know how the centrifuge works. Second, I have to know what materials it's made out of. Third, I have to know what the failure mode is. Fourth, I need to know how to program that centrifuge to make it fail. Fifth, I have to figure out what software is on the centrifuge controller. Sixth, I need to figure out what software is being used to send that software to the controller. Seventh, I need to figure out what software is being used in the office where they manage the software that is created to manage the controllers, to manage the centrifuges. Think about the reverse engineering there. This is genius stuff. They dropped a flash drive in a parking lot. Somebody plugged it into their office, which was a low security technical capability office, and that allowed the software, the virus that was loaded on that flash drive, to jump into the computers that were being used to write controlling software, to jump into the controllers, and then to cause the centrifuges to speed up and slow down in certain frequency ranges, very much like bending a paperclip back and forth. And then the centrifuge would fail. Now, the other piece of the genius here is they put a randomization factor in it that basically made sure all the centrifuges didn't fail at once, which would make it very clear that it was a cyber attack. They were failing kind of randomly. It was a randomized pattern. That's some pretty good software. On the other hand, you don't have to be pretty good at the software. The Russians went after the Ukrainians back in 2015, and they launched something against the shipping terminals in Ukraine. Unfortunately, that virus got picked up by a Maersk truck that was going to a Maersk port. And when that software, it was called NotPetya, when that software got onto the Maersk controllers, the port controllers, all of the Maersk network is a series of servers, about 189 of them, all across the entire world. And they're all in an open trust relationship, meaning that what one server knows, the other server knows. What one server knows, every server knows. And so they accidentally get this malware onto the Maersk server, and it spreads to every Maersk server in the world and shuts them down. It was ransomware. So it basically shut down the entire global shipping system because, let's face it, there's Maersk and then there's lots of little guys. And there's some really big companies that I'm dismissing by calling them little guys, but that's it. I mean, there's Maersk and then everybody else is down here. And Maersk was shut down Global shipping was shut down. That software does everything from computing how the load bearing of a ship. So you pick up a container, you weigh it, and you put it in a specific place on the ship so that the ship is balanced. You see how tall those loads are. So you try to get that load balanced. Well, if you don't have that software, you have to manually compute every container location on that ship. So shipping was just shut down. Now, that was because the Russians launched something against the Ukrainians, but they didn't care about the collateral damage, or they were too stupid to think about it. But it shut down global shipping. Again, you wonder why the Europeans are mad at the Russians. Maersk got lucky. One server in Uganda was down for maintenance that day. And as soon as they figured that out, they contacted the folks in Uganda and they said, don't turn it back on. They said, we want you to uninstall the hard drives. So they pulled the hard drives out. We want you to put them in lead-lined boxes. And then, because they didn't have a courier route from Uganda all the way to London, they had them flown to Cairo, and then from Cairo to Cyprus, and then from Cyprus to Rome, and then from Rome to London. There was this daisy chain of people hand-carrying a lead box with 2 hard drives in it, and Maersk rebuilt their entire network, their entire global network, with 2 hard drives. You know, sometimes we get stupid and sometimes we get lucky. The Hezbollah walkie-talkies and the pagers. That was another kind of brilliant idea. Nasty, but brilliant. Hezbollah stopped using cell phones because of the security thing. It was actually a young female operative from Mossad who had just finished her mandatory military service. And she noticed that during COVID, a lot of the Israeli leaders were making greater use of their cell phones. And she said, you know, that could be a vulnerability. People could track us that way. And everybody said, oh, yeah, hey, wait a minute. Everybody else is doing that too. Who do we want to track? Well, the folks in Lebanon figured out that they were being tracked, and so they switched over to an old model pager, a pager that was made in Taiwan. What they didn't know is that the Israelis had bought the license for making those pagers from the company in Taiwan, had set up a shell company to manufacture them, and they manufactured a lot of bona fide pagers, sold them to establish a reputation. We have cheap, reliable pagers. And then paid the correct bribes to the correct people to get the Hezbollah purchasing agent to purchase their pagers. The pagers were not particularly explosive. They had a little bit of high explosive wrapped around the battery as insulation. And as long as the battery didn't overheat, that explosive insulation would not detonate. And then they waited until they needed to use those pagers, and they sent a code to the pager that caused the battery to overheat and set off the explosive. And of course, to make matters nasty, what do most people do when their pager goes off? They pick it up and they stare at it. So most of them went off in people's hands or in front of people's faces. This is not apocalyptic. This is stuff that is being done. That was the first time this one was particularly used, but that's not the last time. Now, how do you win a war? We talked originally about phase 0, phase 1, phase 2. There are centers of gravity. Von Clausewitz said this, Dewey said this, a couple other theorists said this, but there are centers of gravity. Think of them as concentric circles. The outermost circle is the alliances and the friendships and the financial connections that one country has with another. The next inner circle is going to be the military for that country, the military strength and the military capability. Within that circle is going to be the industrial capability that maintains that military capability. And within that circle is going to be national leadership. And as you get circle in, circle in, circle in, you eventually get to the core center of gravity, and that is the will to fight. As we saw at Old Dominion the other day, the will to fight is what matters. A gunman walked into a classroom and opened fire in an ROTC class, and 2 or 3 cadets jumped to their feet and attacked the gunman. They had the will to fight. What would have happened if that gunman had walked in and everybody was so scared they jumped under their desks and waited hoping that nobody would come after them? We would have seen much more carnage. That midshipman at the Naval Academy last year, he had the will to fight. He had the wrong information, but he had the will to fight. And he carried the fight to what he thought was the enemy, but it wasn't. How do you defeat a country? You have to break their alliances. You have to defeat their military. You have to break their industrial capability. Remember what we did to Germany during World War II. We devastated the industrial capacity of that country. You have to convince the national leaders that they no longer want to pursue this, but then you have to convince the people that they no longer want to pursue this. Well, what do you think will happen if we suddenly have no banks, no ATMs, no medical care, no groceries, no power, no gasoline? How much longer do you think our will to fight will last in the face of those challenges? That's why cyber warfare is the next scary phase of, as von Clausewitz said, politics by other means. That's why cyber warfare is something we should be concerned about. Now, what can we do about it? We're a First Amendment country. We're very open. We like it that way. It was designed that way, but it also makes us very vulnerable. We are also very protective of our information. So first off, we're an open society, but don't get into my stuff. Somewhere along the line, we need to find the guardrails and the balance point that allows us to analyze what's happening, not only to companies and military formations, but to individuals as well. If all of a sudden one day, everyone at Goodwin House gets a phishing email, but nobody else does, do you think the investigators are going to want to know what it is about Goodwin House that made them go after? But if we're all saying, hey, that's none of your business, that's going to make it very difficult for us to identify those patterns. And so we need to figure out where the knee in the curve is between our privacy and how open our society is in terms of detecting and acting against things that are, quite frankly, as subtle as an explosive pager in your back pocket and potentially twice as deadly. So that's one of the things we need to do. The other thing we need to do is we need to fund the research that goes into not only cyber defense, but cyber offense. And we are doing that. And I can't talk about most of it, but we are doing that. And we have cyber offensive capabilities, just like a lot of other countries have cyber offensive capabilities. And guess what? In Iran 2 weeks ago, when we shut down their networks and we shut down their communications, that was not just the Israelis. We were part of that game because the opening shots went clickety-clack. Questions? I hope I haven't scared everybody, but I probably have. Jim. Mr. Hoban.
David, amazing talk. And
Thank
now
you.
will you do an hour of upbeat information?
Ah,
But as you did mention, appropriations and research is going very fast on this matter of defense and offense. And quite seriously, the illustrations that you've shared, many, many, and very rich, causes all of us to walk out maybe a little less hopeful.
well, let me put some hope into there. So 10 years ago, there were about 20,000 attacks against the Pentagon daily, cyber attacks. This last year, there were somewhere in the vicinity of about 2 million. Guess what? How many of them worked? 0. As far as we can tell, 0. because we're pretty good at cyber defense. Now, my job was to understand what we were good at and find holes behind that. And my teams and myself, we were very good at doing that. But let me tell you, dressing up like a janitor with a bucket and a mop to get into a building is actually kind of a tough one to pull off for the Chinese and the Russians. You got to get somebody who's an insider, you have to turn them, you have to get somebody who's local and has local knowledge. That's a tough one to do. And so we were really bringing a varsity NFL level game to the cyber defenses. Our enemies are doing that. And oh, by the way, because of public law and a number of other things, we were required to follow certain rules that our adversaries are not obliged to observe. But there is a varsity game going on out there right now. And generally speaking, we're doing pretty good. But we have to stay ahead. We cannot be stuck in reacting. We have to be proacting. Sir.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to know what was going on with a phone call I got a week ago on Friday. It was about 1:30 in the afternoon. I got a phone call and asked me, and it was, the phone ID said it was from a place where I had a credit card, and so I answered the phone call and I said hello, and the person said, "Did you happen to get a bill from? Did you happen to make a purchase from Amazon for $299 recently?" So I was sort of pulling out the information about this credit card because I might have made not to Amazon, but I might have made a purchase. And I said, well, first of all, what's my name? And the
Question.
person said, human. And I said, human what? And she said, human male.
She's working off of a database.
And I said, human male? And she hung up.
She's working off of a database. Okay, our data is out there. Your cell phones, your landlines, all of those phones are available public information. Your name is not often associated with it, but some databases have that too. Remember all those compromised databases. The Chinese compromised the OPM database, which has all of our security clearance information, and my security clearance was compromised. It wasn't the clearance so much, it was all of the background investigation materials, which included my wife's name, middle name, her parents' names, and a whole bunch of identifying information. Only a few years later, somebody compromised my wife's USAA account by getting into her online presence, which she never uses, using her questions that they pulled out of the OPM database to answer the identifying questions, and then tried to take a house loan against her account. Now, we caught it because we're very good at noticing things like proof of life tests on credit cards and stuff like that. We actually caught this one because we went to fill the car with gas, and when we put the zip code into the machine, it refused the card. And when we called USAA, they said, well, you just moved to Mississippi. Yes, ma'am.
Staying on a personal level for a moment, excuse me, I somehow started getting email spam from a gun store. Don't ask me how. And normally I would go in and I would unsubscribe. But when I went to do that, it wanted not just my name, it wanted my birth date, it wanted all this personal information, and I just decided, no, I'm not going to do that. And so it's on my spam list. I don't even have to look at it. But was I right to not
Absolutely.
put that information on?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No reputable company will ask you to identify yourself.
Okay. The second thing is you talked earlier about when you want to make a large purchase online, you go out and you get a gift card. Give me a clue as to how large monetarily we're talking about that you might recommend that we do that.
Purchases under a couple of $100 are probably not noticeable, but notice I only say probably. Any transaction is noticeable. This is why I do not do online banking at all. I either go to the branch, or with my IRA, I go to Fidelity and I work with an agent directly. Now, they still log into an account and everything. I get that. But I just do not move money around online, simply because I know how easy it is to break into someone's computer. And most people's computers are very easy. Now, if you get an email like that, that's a spam. You get an Amazon call, that's a spam call. You're getting basically phished. Someone is trying to get you to identify your information to them. This is why, you know, the 19 Medicare calls that I get a day, you have parts A and B, don't you? Maybe. Now, my wife says that I'm having too much fun with the telephone. I got a call the other day and I picked up the phone and I realized that it was a robocall. And I said, I told you not to call me here. But the job is done. And just like you wanted, there's blood everywhere. And then I hung up the phone. And Susan said, when the SWAT team shows up at our front yard, you're going to regret having so much fun. Yes, sir.
I read that. Thank you. I read that a number of American embassy staff, starting in Moscow, but other European capitals, were attacked by some kind of cyber attacks which harmed them mentally and physically.
That was not so much a cyber attack. The best that we know at this point, and we don't know a lot at this point because it also happened in Cuba and a couple other locations, is that it appears to have been some sort of directed energy, probably a microwave. You know, imagine putting your hand in the microwave oven while it's running. And we think what that was is that was a directed microwave or directed sonic, low frequency sonic. And we're not sure because both of them do the same kind of damage. It's very much like a concussion.
What was the purpose of it?
I'm thinking that they were probably, A, it falls in the category of mischief, that's phase 0. But B, it's probably an experimental new weapon, and before it's being used on the battlefield, it's getting tested. You want to do human testing? Do human testing against people you don't like. Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
And then Sheila.
okay. I filed my tax returns a couple of weeks ago and asked for a check in the mail. What I got was a letter from the IRS saying, no, you have to now, because some change in the law, you have to use ID.me.
Yes.
And I know ID.me is not a government system. How trustworthy is it?
ID.me is pretty good. Login.gov is also pretty good. And if you're working with the IRS or any government entity, using login.gov is probably the best way to go. It's one of the better protected identity management systems. These are all basically multi-factor identity. So you log in with a username and password, or if you have a token card, you use your token card in your computer, but then it sends you a validation signal on your cell phone that you then have to copy and put back into your laptop. So any system that does that, and ID.me does the same thing, is a lot more secure than most. But for my money, login.gov.
It took me almost longer to log in than
Yes.
it did to do the taxes. It
Yes.
is a very involved system. That's
It
true.
is. It is. And it's meant to be difficult. And it's meant to be not automated. It's meant to essentially defeat an automated script, a robot that's trying to access your stuff. It requires a human to do things. Have any of you ever gone to log into something and you get this little grid of pictures and it says, show us all, click all the squares that have bicycles in them? I always get in trouble. I'm so literal. It's a 3x3 grid. And if the handlebar of the bicycle is in the corner of one of those boxes, I'll click the box and it'll say, no, you got that wrong. It's like, it's not a bicycle, it's just a handle. Sheila.
What organizations in this country are responsible for research on cybersecurity and future research? And do you feel that we are ahead of the game with this, or are we where are we along that, and are we going to have enough funding for that down the road? Do you feel that?
It's not a thermometer, so I can't say we're warm or we're cold, because it's not a simple evaluation. We are really good in some things and really bad in some other things. Now, who's at the forefront of developing cyber defenses and cyber warfare capabilities? NSA. And if I told you more, I'd have to kill you. No. NSA, I am convinced, remember you used to hear that sailors got a choice, the judge gave them a choice. You can either enlist in the Navy or you can go to jail. Well, I'm pretty sure that through the 90s and the early 2000s, judges would lean over the bench to computer hackers and say, okay, here's your choice, son. You can either go to prison and be prevented from ever touching a laptop ever again, or your country will give you the highest possible security clearance available and you can develop for them. And so I'm pretty sure that most of the kids that I worked with at NSA had a sealed record somewhere. It's also true that everything they did was under seal because they are really good. The CISA agency is also very good. There are a number of agencies. DIA is very good. The Pentagon is doing a really good job at this. But like I said, we are really good in some areas and we are really careless in others. The whole password thing, I can't tell you how many commands that I've gone to where the default password was password. So to maybe draw a ribbon around this, I'll say organizationally, we're pretty hot, but individually, we're lukewarm. And it's the individual that counts here. Sir.
Yeah, I have a practical question related to the email spam. You get an email and you can unsubscribe. Clicking on unsubscribe, is that dangerous?
Not really. It sort of depends. If you get a text that allows you to unsubscribe, it says text stop or something like that, that's usually pretty secure. And it's a low risk. It's an extremely low risk. Unsubscribe on emails. Generally speaking, I don't bother to read emails that come from people that I don't know. And I block a lot of stuff. I just set a block up in my email engine in Outlook or in Gmail, and I do the same thing on my phone. I get calls from somebody and I just don't ever want to hear from them again. I block the number, and that tool is available to you.
Okay. Let's take one more question, and then I want to let you know we've reserved table number 11 in the bistro, and Dave has agreed to stay for lunch. And so if you want to come on down and have lunch with us, and we'll see how many people we can squeeze at that table.
We get a lot of information about how to create a password with umpty 7 different characteristics that supposedly is secure. My feeling, however, is that, and then you get asked, would you like the password manager to remember it? That the vulnerability is actually in the password manager software.
You should always click never on that one. Passwords. Everybody tells you, don't write your password down. Well, don't write your password down and then stick it to the screen of your laptop. But if you write your password down and you keep it in your wallet or someplace that's separated from where you use it, the chances of somebody knocking you over the head, stealing your wallet, going through the paper litter in your wallet, finding that sticky note that has the password on it, and then figuring out what device to use it on is really, really low. And I'm pretty sure the Chinese and the Russians aren't going to do that to military people either. And so my advice to them all along has been, if you have to write down your password, write it down, but keep it separate. And oh, by the way, an easy way to get a complex password is to read a good book. Because if you start your password off with, say, yes, from Lewis Carroll, "'Twas brillig in the slithy toves, did gyre and gambol in the wabe, all mimsy were the borogroves." Any segment of that is going to be really hard to identify. So, although I did a pro bono investigation for a charity over on the Eastern Shore, over on Kent Island. Their paywall had been compromised. And I figured out that they were using a really simple password. So I said, look, you know, take a good book and take a quote from that book. Well, they took a scripture quote, and so their username was Luke 3:17, and then the password was a quote from Luke 3:17. It was, okay, stop. We will take one more question, ma'am. You've been patient.
You always say that companies will not ask you for information, but I deal with PNC, and when I try to pay the bill, I call them, and they ask me questions. And I said, why are you questioning me? I don't want to pay someone else's bill. I don't understand this.
Yeah.
But they insist. They say, well, you were down to CVS today. How much did you spend? I'm not kidding. It's very difficult to pay my bill.
That's
over the
actually a
phone.
very good multiple factor. If they say, if you went to CVS on Tuesday, what was the amount? That's information that only you and they would have. So some scammer is not going to have that information unless they got your receipt tape.
But I'm trying to pay a bill, not get money. I don't understand that. I don't know how much.
Right, but what they're trying to do is make sure that you are you. That's why when they ask me what the question, you know, what was the name of your first dog? I use the name of my wife's first dog, because that's something only I would know, and anybody who knows me and knows the name of my first dog would get it wrong. So you don't have to be really fancy about it. You just have to take one logical sidestep away from the assumption that the attackers are using. Thank you.